work or the events that occurred. Have a presentation here for you all that we're going to try to go through, kind of discussing all the things, candid conversation with regard to permitting and all the other things that we're trying to accomplish to get this back to where it was, if not in a better condition than it was since those events. You do have a presentation here. I've included this for everyone. I'm just going to kind of go through this. The intent, at least of our meeting, is to try to disseminate the information. Me talk as little as possible but with you guys having a good understanding, and then kind of open it up for conversations and questions so that you can fully understand what the plan is here with regard to this particular project. So thank you for coming. I appreciate you taking the time. I apologize that you had to walk in, but we needed to keep this closed for obvious reasons. Folks climb over things. Get hurt, those kinds of things, and it really is in our best interest to get this repaired and opened up, which we really want to do, and hopefully open again this is our hope. So I'll go into greater detail with that. So we have been, since this event, we have been actively working on trying to get concepts as well as different design components to this project in order. We've met with all of the regulatory agencies, including our DCD department, Fish and Wildlife, the Corps of Engineers. The tribe has even offered their points of view on this. So there has been a lot of conversation. I'd like to, before we get too far along, we do have a design team that is helping me and us put this together. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Jessica, why don't you go ahead and start?
I'm Jessica Cote. Some of you may have met me before. So I'm also working with Mid-Sound on the Point No Point Estuary Restoration Project. But yeah, we're the design engineers for this beach repair and longer term maintenance components of, we'll talk about the beach and the revetment and everything needed to shore up the shoreline. And I am one of, there's 8 other people in my company, and it's been all hands on deck trying to get designs put together as quickly as we can. So
I'm Sasha Ertl. I work with Greddy Associates. We do environmental permitting. So basically I take Jessica's designs and provide input on environmental ramifications or benefits of what we see and what species are here, how they can be impacted or benefited by our proposal, and then also work to get the permits from the federal agencies like the Corps of Engineers and WDFW, and then also the local Kitsap County Park.
I'm Chuck Cazzetto. I'm the PIO Communications and Marketing Coordinator for the Parks Department. Thanks everybody for being here today. And yeah, Aaron's going to do a great job leading us around.
Alex Wisniewski, he's the Parks Director, so I work for him. He's the boss. Okay. If you turn to the second page, just kind of give you guys kind of a quick timeline of what transpired around here. It was not only the December 27th king tide of the extreme water level, the low pressure, the north wind. There was some events previous to that where actually started seeing some erosion occurring. We believe that is attributed to what occurred out here on the 27th.
Well, we weakened the shoreline. Yeah, so for those of you who live out here are probably familiar that on November 5th there was a very significant wind wave event that caused quite a lot of erosion along the shoreline. And we have photos of that from property owners, and so we're able to get a rough idea of several feet of erosion, particularly like right in front of the parking area over here. You can clearly see that the beach that used to be there was eroded and exposed with rock that hadn't been exposed before. So that event really weakened the shoreline and the width of the beach berm. which allowed a lot of the overtopping, so we call wind waves that come up and over the top, literally overtopping, from the really extreme high water levels from a low pressure event on December 27th.
Okay. January 7th of 2022 is our first flood.
That's correct.
We lost initially about 3 foot of the North Beach and fill in maybe a foot back. So when we went into November, December, we were already 1 to 2 feet off that beach.
So we've actually been doing beach profile measurements here for the last several years. And so the beach actually almost 100% recovered from that January event when you actually just look at the overall elevation change and beach profile with, and it's already recovering now from that December event. So it had more or less recovered, but it was really that November to December 1-2 punch that was the most extreme. Not to be controversial or to
No,
disagree.
we just lost the vegetation in January, and
Sure.
Sand doesn't stop water. Vegetation will.
That is absolutely correct.
Have you seen previous washouts as high as 6 to 8 feet along here?
I've been working at the site since 2017,
Yeah.
so I haven't necessarily been out here during those events. I've seen a lot of photos of different
They're
events
scary.
since that time.
Send them over. Send
Yeah.
your pictures over.
Particularly the January 2022, we actually had a wave and water level gauge out here, and so we've actually been able to, very accurately predict and calculate those numbers, and all of that information does feed into this design and what we would really like to do in terms of not just putting it back to the current elevation, but raising it, or having some permitting challenges with that.
And
Go back to
vegetating.
Aaron.
I'll get
And
back into
vegetating,
that.
yeah.
So in response to that, in January of 2023, Public Works came in, put the super sacks here. We now have black plastic on top of them to try to protect the super sacks from. Sun. As the sun beats on them, they start to break up. So that's why you've seen the black plastic out here. In March to May, we have been looking at design alternatives. We discussed the potential repairs with all of the regulatory agencies. That would be the Corps of Engineers, WDFW, Department of Ecology. The tribes were at that meeting. As well as we've done our pre-application meeting with our DCD department. So we have a pretty clear idea of what it's going to take from a permitting perspective and what they're going to allow us or not allow us to do. So
And Coast Guard.
and the Coast Guard too. Keeping in mind, as this gentleman mentioned over here, where that red truck car is, pretty much that from that way east is all Coast Guard properties. It's not owned by the Kitsap County Park.
DCD being Department of Community Development.
Correct.
Kitsap County.
With Kitsap County, correct.
Can you define the total footprint you're looking at? Because you say East Beach, a lot of people think East Beach, North Beach. So how far around are you talking about going for this project?
So I'm going to get into the project. It's a multi-phased thing. It has to be because the regulatory agencies are saying this is what you have to do before we'll allow you to get in there. So when we're talking about the east piece, it's more associated with, if you walk down the revetment, you can see where it turns. It starts going that way. That other side, that's considered. The east beach.
But not all the way down the whole length of the existing dike levee is there? Past the tide gate, all of that?
There's a picture there that shows it's one
Okay,
section
okay.
of the East Beach that's eroded away. But you're right, it is over that direction. That is what we
It goes to the end of the park property. I don't think there's.
Park property gets clear to that bluff.
Yeah, so these are just, so, let's let's start talking about the elements of the, oh, I guess the East Beach is the first page. Okay, sorry. So the East Beach, you're right, is that stretch of shoreline over there, but there are just a couple of very low spots over there that we know from having, we did a big drone aerial survey a couple of years ago, and then we've done other spot elevation checks. And so during that December event, not only did we get overtopping here, but we also got overtopping of that. And all of those things fill up the marsh with water that then has no way to get out. So these are just a couple of isolated areas. It's not from here all the way to the staircase. It's just pockets of areas where it's low. And you can see if you walk along that trail, you'll see sand that washed onto the trail and gravel that's washed onto the trail. And a lot of those spots are places where there's trails that cut through the vegetation. There's no vegetation, and out to the beach. And so we're gonna block a few of those and keep fewer open just to, again, eliminate that ability for water to come through those trails and into the marsh. The main trail will stay open, but it's just filling and increasing the elevation of some of those really low spots to prevent water from coming this winter
Just
time.
this little
Yeah.
shaped bit right here on the East Beach. So that's
Because it really, it reached first, so here you could see the gravel and all the driftwood.
If you flip to the next page, that was basically the field survey that occurred this year once that event had occurred. So you'll see the low spot that developed, obviously, and some changes in the contours. With regard to where it was previous to that. Any questions on that? Okay. The elevation change map, maybe you can explain this a little bit.
Yeah.
This is based on modeling, or is it not?
No, so this is basically taking that 2018 surface and subtracting off this current surface. And so what you see here is that red shows erosion or loss of beach material. And if there was any blue or purple, I guess there's a smidgen, but that's probably not real, would show accretion. So essentially what this is depicting is the areas of highest erosion. So we all know about the channel, which is super obvious to see. So that's right here is where that channel formed, deepest in the middle. There was also a hot spot of erosion here. So this is right in front of that parking area, so where there used to be all of the signs in front of that parking area that all fell over.
That was mostly to the pumps. That's where all the pumps got. We had,
where the pumps
you
were-
had three
were
6 and a
discharging.
12-inch pump.
Yeah, there's
Right.
pump
Dished
and
that all
water,
out.
that's worse all the time.
Yeah.
Well, it was, this survey was actually done prior to that pumping. So this was erosion that happened.
How could it be prior to the pumping? The flood was the 27th, the pumping started the 29th.
No, the pumping didn't start until after they got the super stacks in January sometime.
I believe so. I believe that's
No,
No, absolutely not. I'm
No,
front and
it was
center. I
early.
came down
Okay.
every day.
Okay. Then, well,
Whatever.
it is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, this, I was here and I did see some of the pumping, and they were not very big pumps, and I would be just very surprised that it could create this large of an area. This is
It was
a
a
large
huge,
area of erosion.
there was 3 6-inch pumps and a 12-inch pump. 6-inch pumps are doing 5,000+ gallons an hour. The 12 is doing 15,000 gallons an hour. They ran 24/7 for 4 days before they made a dent, and another 3 days before they started reducing pumps.
Yeah.
Well, so
People were
there has been a
kayaking
lot
down
of
our
loss
street.
of material though all the way across, so out on the point here too, so this is another hot spot of erosion. Not surprising, the point's a very dynamic area. For those of you who have lived here probably know that. The yellow and green are also erosion, it's just less erosion. So there's a scale bar on the side, so greens are 1 to 2 feet of erosion, yellows and oranges are 3 to 4, and reds are 5 to 6 feet. So that just gives you a sense of the overall kind of patterns of loss of sediment. And again, this really helps us inform how much material do we need just to get back to previous elevations, and then if we were to add on top of that, what kind of volumes would we be looking
Hasn't
at?
a lot of that come back? I mean, I walk that beach all the time. I mean, there's no hole.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a hole here.
Well, there's no depression.
It's a depression. So I don't know about this area specifically. I can tell you in the tidal channel, I was out with the GPS and I did take some measurements over on this North Beach section, and we had estimated that the beach berm, so the outer area that used to be the highest, which was about 12 feet relative to NAD88 datum, is up to about 11. It's not as wide, it's not as robust, but a lot of sediment has started coming back.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is kind of go over comprehensively the entirety of what we're trying to do. Now, folks understand two different projects. I know that they're linked with regard to the tide gate and what's going on with that. A lot of stuff, very controversial, a lot of discussion. I'm not talking about that for this one, okay? This is really just focused on this particular beach nourishment, what I'm telling you, because I don't know the answer to that tide gate. There's still a lot. Associated with that. What I'm trying to do is get the replenishment and the nourishment done, as well as some additional protections put in place. So I'm just going to kind of go through these and kind of let you know. There is a map on the next page, if you take a look at those, that identifies the various areas that I will be talking about and what we intend to do. So as far as this area over here, what we want to do is repair the eroded beach areas with beach nourishment material. In addition, utilize the material, which I think you've already talked to the regulators and they were okay with us utilizing this material in the super sacks back to help fill back in. So
I'm going to be more specific.
yes.
So the material in the super sacks would only be used in the depression, the lowest depression where that channel formed as a base layer, not out into the beach berm. So we're going to use like substrate, so sand essentially, for everything else. And it will all, that material that's in this super sacks, it barely makes a dent in what we need. And so we will be adding sand on top of that. So you will not see that material unless we get another big erosion event before we're able to establish vegetation and all those other things. So it's more of a base layer, and it's not out on the outer beach and not in like fish habitat areas.
I don't see a detail here for the fabric. Was there not?
The Coyer mat, Coyer, there is in the cross section. I can do that.
So part of how you guys, we talked about the vegetation piece and holding the sand and those kinds of things. Part of what we want to do is we're also going to, she's also designed a system in which you basically put core fabric and you lay it down, you fill it, and then you roll it back over. And the idea being is it will help lock the stuff together. So as the beach things are happening, now that's just one component. I'm going to talk about another one that we're going to do too, but we're going to interlace core fabric to actually give it some strength, I guess, some stability. As this stuff is happening, it will hopefully keep it in place. In addition, and I'll get into this in a second because I know you want to talk about that, we're going to vegetate the heck out of this thing, and we're going to isolate only small pieces in which people can walk through. We want to keep people off of the shoreline that we're trying to reestablish vegetation, because the vegetation is critical, as everybody's already discussed. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so what Aaron was talking about, so we have this, so this is our original design.
Hold up the chart that you're looking at so we know where we are.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, it's called North Beach Proposed Repairs Plan View. So the dark gray, so that's the beach berm. So the highest part of the beach and what we call the crest. So the top of it, so the beach comes up and slope, and then it flattens out and has this beach berm crest. So that's the area that Aaron was talking about, where we would layer coir matting with 1 foot of sand, coir mat, 1 foot of sand, coir mat, to help provide stability and strength. That coir mat will biodegrade over time. It's really there as a short-term measure until vegetation gets established. As you can see, I mean, vegetation wants to be here. You can see how much vegetation has already self-recruited since this event. This back area, so from the dark gray line, this is landward, so the road is over here. We're calling that the foredune. So if you've been out to like, there's an area of Fort Townsend State Park, out to the outer coast, you'll see that there's like a multi-dune system, right? So there's a sandier dune, and then you have a back area that has lots and lots of vegetation on it. So that's essentially what we're mimicking here. So this foredune area that's got the crosses on it, so that's going to be higher. So it'll be about 14 feet. It's going to be 14 feet, so 2 feet higher than the beach berm was before all of this happened. So we're raising all that up by 2 feet and adding tons of vegetation. We're also going to, any wood that's out there now, we basically take it and we set it aside, and then after we put all the sand and the vegetation, we put the wood back. And we're going to also bring in wood. We're actually not showing a detail with wood on here. I realize.
I'll just chime in on that. Until I got into this business, I didn't know that all this driftwood, a lot of it is intentionally placed, but we call it large woody debris in the permitting world. It provides shelter for juvenile fish and their prey and insects to live in it that can then fall into the water and feed the fish, plus it helps with erosion issues. So whenever you're on the beach and you're like, driftwood, chances are it may even be chained in place or anchored in place, but it's an intentional placement of it to kind of, especially in areas where natural sources of that have been lost because of development.
People are trying to listen around this. And then the really critical area here is that intersection with the revetment. So anytime we have a soft beach and a hard structure, it's the weakest point along the shoreline. And so we've designed that revetment to be set landward, not the whole thing, but at least this initial portion where it starts on the lawn, to be set back landward a little bit further, so it's more in line with this parking area. There's actually quite a lot of rocks sticking out onto the beach right now that's further seaward than the concrete vertical wall that's over there. So pulling that back and then reburying that whole area, so placing sediment back in that area and vegetation as well. So all of that's shown in a cross section on the next.
I'm going to chime in on that revetment also. Another issue with Puget Sound, something that has been identified as being a struggle, creating a struggle for the salmonids, the salmon that are endangered, is just loss of shoreline. And every time we put a bulkhead, whether it's vertical, that takes away their near shore area. So forage fish like smelts and sand lance, things that salmon eat, spawn on the shoreline, on the beach. So sometimes, if you've ever had to do a project on the beach, we actually will go and do a forage fish survey. It's right basically where the top of where the last tide is where we collect our soil. So they actually glue their eggs to the sand. And so there's some forage fish spawning habitat here. So that takes, if the top of the water is lapping against a rock wall, then they don't have any place to lay their eggs. So that's a struggle. Plus just near shore habitat in general. It also changes the wave action. So as waves, particularly with vertical armoring, as waves hit that, it erodes it away. So this revetment, the fact that we can move it back will avail more habitat. It'll help with the just kind of natural processes of the shoreline. Yes.
So I have a question. So how far, when you start the restoration and start to, how far back from the water or what are you?
Yeah. So on these things, there are some letters. There's HTL. That means that's the high tide line. And then there's also ordinary high water. So those two lines are what the Corps of Engineers use and Washington Fish and Wildlife use to, if your project's going to go below those, then they have to then they are in charge of regulating it. So you'll see OHWL on there, I think, and then HTL. So those high tide line is, you do an analysis over the last 10 years of the highest high tides.
Right.
So if that helps you at all picture, or you're thinking more, I don't know.
Trying to get a visual.
Yeah,
And I mean, this berm crest is intended in the location that it was previously.
Okay.
So the edge of this, like if you were walking up the beach and you came up to the highest point of the beach previously, prior to these events, that will be in the same location,
that's
at
what I
least
was
as it was in
curious.
2018. 'Cause that's what we have to
Bringing
go
it
off
out,
of.
or you bringing it back?
No, that will be the same. Just the rock wall
Got
will
it.
be slid back a little bit.
We're actually not allowed to go seaward,
I wouldn't think so.
so that would be filling the waterways, other than just to bring it back up to where it was before. So most of our work will just be bringing it up to that previous condition, but then adding elevation on the back side. And if you want just a general idea of like vegetation, this cross section kind of gives you a general sense of, we've got the dune that's going to have dune grass, it's going to have the sand verbena that's out there, low-lying, types of dune plants, and then there'll be shrubs, rugosa rose, shrubs you see similar over on the East Beach shoreline, and then on the furthest side closest to the road, trees. So shore pines, willows, but saltwater tolerant types of trees. Trees are incredibly one of the most important. I mean, trees and shrubs, they're like rebar, right? That really hold that sediment. So to make this shoreline as resilient as possible, we need lots and lots of vegetation.
That will provide another 2 feet of protection as big water comes in, if and when it does, to help keep the water back that way. In addition, the work that she's done, we've identified, at least with the revetment, it needs to be redone. So that is part of this project as well, replacing with more new rock. Pulling it back a little bit, maybe a little bit of elevation gain, but probably not that much.
It'll be mostly the same rock. We haven't done the full calculations of all the volumes of rock, so we're pulling it, and we're really only pulling it landward near the parking lot where it connects it. And then the rest of it's more like cleaning it up. It's pulling all the rock out, restacking it. This is a very, very, very old structure. It doesn't have things like a fabric. We put geotextile fabrics behind them now to prevent all the soils from washing out. It doesn't have smaller filtered rock behind it, again, to provide a layer of stability. It doesn't have the right gradation of rock. So the rock will have to be supplemented some, but a lot of this is restacking, rebuilding, and adding in the appropriate layers so that it has a better drainage system. It just doesn't get all that sort of washing out from behind.
That's even better.
That's what we're trying to do, you guys. With regard to all the restoration, the beach nourishment, we're hoping to get some credit for that associated with trying to provide some additional habitat. All the plantings we're doing, for dune, keeping folks associated with 1 or 2 trails as opposed to a free-for-all for the whole thing to go on, walk on, and trample. Our hope is that this work here will mitigate, we won't pay the federal government $500,000. That's what we're trying to do. But you can kind of get some perspective now of all the freaking hoops that we have to kind of work through in order to help protect folks. And that's what's most frustrating to me, because the reality is that we've had one already, we're probably going to have some more. And it's just not a game, it's a game, I guess.
Put it back the same as it was, and we get the same event again, and it does the same thing again.
So that's the intent. You're right, 100%. That's the intent with placing this foredune, to add another 2 feet worth of protection to keep the water on that side. as well as rebuilding this revetment, pull it back a little bit to provide some of that additional protection. So it's going above and beyond that original condition. And candidly, that's what the regulators are not taking exception with. They want extensive study and research if you're going to change it and make it higher than it was. That's the big issue to them. Frowned upon so much that if you're going to put a revetment back, you have to pay the federal agency a certain amount of money in order to mitigate for those impacts. In this particular case, and if we replace the revetment, they've estimated $500,000 we'll have to give to the federal agencies for that impact. So I'm just telling you that's the...
By giving it to the federal agencies, it's...
so they can use it on other projects,
So they can
I'm
use
sure.
it for restoration if we can't find something on site that can reverse those impacts. So that's where things
I wasn't
like...
done yet. Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
sorry,
you're fine.
Aaron.
You're fine.
Yeah, but the Coast Guard's a federal agency.
Yeah.
That's correct.
We're not giving it to them.
Different federal agencies.
Yeah.
Is there a website?
Say again?
Is there a website with a lot of this information on it? If somebody was to see the video on YouTube, where could they find more information?
Can you email me?
Well, National Marine Fisheries is what they're talking about in terms of the mitigation specifically and the requirements in terms of, there's something called a NOAA calculator, which is what calculates the amount of impact that you're going to have on the near shore.
Yeah, they can Google the Salish Sea nearshore biological opinion, programmatic biological opinion, which is through National Marine Fisheries Service. Thanks for asking that. Thanks for that.
Brittany has a comment from
I can probably add a little context on that. And I used to work in permitting.